Even though we have given out an already made and done profile for ArcUI, many players eventually, of course, want to style their own UI based on their own preferences and their own flavors. And obviously, having skipped all of the legwork, all of the busy work of learning how to use an add-on because you took an imported profile, you might be a bit confused, a bit disoriented on how an add-on works. So for today, we're taking a look at ArcUI, which is at the moment the most used add-on for styling your cooldown manager. We're going to go through the TLDR of some of the features of this add-on, what are the most important things to check out first, for example, and how to style your cooldown manager with a brand new character for this pre-patch, an alt. I just logged in for the first time and everything is set up by default. So the first thing, of course, is, well, you have to enable your cooldown manager because that's what ArcUI does. It styles the cooldown manager. Now, once you log in for the first time, you will have the complete base bare default of the add-on. Just the three groups like a cooldown manager, essential, utility, and buffs, and nothing else. We're not even going to use anything that's ours right now. We're just going to help ourselves with Wowhead and the recommendations of Wowhead when it comes to using a base talent build for the pre-patch and even the UI layout for your Blizzard edit mode. So in here, we're just going to use a preset given to us. Imagining this is just a player doing this for the first time and loading in something completely new or edited. Now, the most important part when it comes to loading in ArcUI for the first time is understanding that you have groups that you can style, you have the profile manager for your entire profile, and then you have the bars. So the bars are their own standalone things. Even if you create bars for your buffs in here, then you have to import the bars as a standalone from your entire profile. So essentially everything you're going to be putting in your cooldown manager right over here that you want to turn into a bar buff and style into a bar buff, it has to be imported individually. Then, once you have styled all of your profile with all of the icons put wherever you want to put them, you have to save your profile and then import the profile or export the profile. The most important one though is the groups. That's because the group layout is what is going to be loaded automatically. Once you have one, you can use it to load automatically on different characters, different specs, and different classes without coming with the baggage of everything you have styled in your profile. For example, if I were to simply load a group that I have here from one of the characters I have styled, like this one, default preservation, technically it does say preservation, but if I were to load this, what we see as a result once the group is loaded is that my icons are still just slotted in somewhat randomly in the slots, but now I have a bunch of different stuff in here because that's what my profile was. That's what my profile had. Obviously, it's a profile for a different spec, so all of this stuff is very random for Priest, but all of your groups will stay where you want them to stay, just based on the group. You don't need to save or load profiles as long as you have your group. Now it has turned into a 9-group setup compared to what I had before, which was a 3-group default. If I am to reload the 3-group default, I am back to using what is essentially the default version of this add-on. To drive the message through, we can do the same thing. Instead of loading a different group that we have made or the positions that we wanted, we can load an entire profile for a different spec though, because this profile is for a Holy Paladin. So if we are to load something made for a Holy Paladin, we will still get the same groups that we wanted in the positions that we wanted to put, but now they are Paladin flavored. Now there isn't too much of a difference. You just have to spend a few right clicks getting rid of all the off-class stuff you had here, and then you're back styling it the way you want. But for a faster way, without having to do all of that, is just to style the groups first, before even thinking about profiles or bars or even the icons themselves. It's just having the group made and ready, because then you can just load them on every different character. Once this is done, for one of these groups, you can load this group on any different character you want, and it will always be like this. Obviously, without the abilities in them, because it's a different class or a different spec, but the group will be set for you to use. Now, in terms of the groups themselves, you can pick and choose whichever one you want. You can create new groups, rename different groups depending on what's your style. Do you want something for defensives or not. If you don't want it, get rid of it. You can see them better when you want to position them by showing the borders. Those are gonna be your groups, so you can move them around, and this is all of the styling of the groups. You can choose picking any one of these, like the defensives, the rows that you want to have, or the columns that you want to have. You can make sure they stay in this line by locking the grid size to this size. If you don't want to have like 4 defensives, imagine you respec to something else, you gain a defensive or something, it just blows out of size. You can force them in place, and you can move them around with the offsets. They have no anchoring. There is no anchor you can choose, like always anchor the defensives to the essential and always anchor mobility to essential, so that when you move these moves together. Unfortunately, for now at least, there is no anchoring for any of these groups, so you have to always manually move them around. This is relevant, something that you could have done, for example, with Weakauras, rest in peace. If you want to switch from having, for example, 4 icons in your essential buttons or 5, so it becomes larger, there is no way for these to be styled. Expanding, if you add more buttons here, you always have to do it manually. Now, once you have this on lockdown, once you have chosen the style of your UI and you have saved, you know now you have a group. So you have done this, that's the first thing you had to do before you even started thinking about specs. Just style this so that even if you exit now and you load into a monk, you can just go into the monk, and in the profiles you can just pick your priest and load it in, and this will be the same for the monk as well. So that's the first thing you had to do. The second thing obviously is to put stuff in, right? Now, there is no relevance in where you put stuff here, in the sense that the only thing that matters is whether or not it shows. If it is in utility or essential, is only relevant for when it automatically fills essential with some of these things. So right now, for example, let's just say it's a Mind Blast, your Tentacle Slam, your Void Torrent, and your Shadow Word Death, right? It has no bearing in the order, at the very least right now, in what you are ordering in here. It's always you who get to choose the order in here compared to the order in here. This one is not that relevant. The only thing that matters is whether or not you want to display it. So for example, if I have Psychic Scream and I say no, then it's gonna go away. If you re-add Psychic Scream, it's gonna show up. If you get rid of it and then you add it into the essential cooldowns, it's still gonna show up here, because the limit here in the essential is 4. This is gonna naturally flow in an unselected position. Then you can put it in your utility, for example. Now, the biggest confusion some players are going to have is when you're trying to style these depending on your spec. Because it's one thing to have the load layout that you can load on different characters, sure. But what about when you want to style different things for the same spec, for example? In some cases, it will be somewhat simple. Priest is good for this because Priest has the 1 or 2 option between Halo and Void Torrent, right? They are 2 different abilities which show up depending on the hero talent you have. So if I enable my Halo instead of my Void Torrent, this is automatic. It just switches from Halo to Void Torrent. It also does so because it was already put in here, the Halo. It was already in the cooldown manager, and it was the only unplaced of these icons. This was the next one in line, so as soon as Void Torrent goes away, you have this one. What you will notice is a number. Now it shows 2 here. It says 2 abilities share this slot, Halo and Void Torrent. This is fine. That's what you want. If you want to switch hero talents, for example, you want them to just replace each other once you respec. Now, one question though is, what about different specs that value abilities differently? Because I might put a seemingly useless Power Shield in mobility for Shadow Priest. Because after all, if I take Body and Soul, right? If I take Body and Soul, this might kind of count for mobility. But what if I switch over to Disc? Because Disc doesn't really treat this as a mobility button, it's a core button for the rotation, right? You could perhaps say the same about having the cooldown of Shadow Word Death as a utility button or a side button for Holy Priest, whereas it's a bigger button for Shadow Priest. The answer is no. The answer is you can't work out the add-on to naturally and manually swap on the same profile. For this is what the profile manager is for. As you can see here, spare spec profiles with full layout snapshots. You have to essentially save a different profile for a different spec if you want it to work, and then enable it based on the talents you have chosen, because otherwise you cannot have different positions for Power Shield. You can't also choose to have it here and simultaneously here, and then choose which one you want to activate based on the spec. It cannot work that way. So in short, you can have these talents swap around based on your talent choice, but you can't have the same button swap positions depending on the spec. Now, when it comes to the icons themselves, they can be styled individually, piece by piece. Let's just say, for example, you want to make really sure that you know that Halo is available. So obviously you can style Halo by itself, like the cooldown animation, for example, or perhaps the glow. You can have only Halo glow. You can change the color of the glow just for Halo, alongside obviously things that still work just with the CDM, the cooldown manager. Like you can still put an alert, a sound alert on Halo becoming available already, or you can change all of them, right? You can just, I don't know, zoom them in if you want to, or out, or all of these changes that would work for all of the active cooldowns you have. From this even down to things like the text, like if you want to change the font of this, or the font of the cooldown itself, right? The cooldown ability. If you want to have a different font than this, then whatever default we have right now, and you want to change it to something else, you can change it, and this would work for all of them at once. And then you can change it to auras. This will be your buffs. You can do the same for the buffs, or you can edit them individually. Again, imagine you have one of these buffs that you care, more about than the other buffs you have set up. You can change, you scan to find them, because you just put them in, so you just check them again. You can edit all of them at once, or just whichever ones you want to make special. At the moment, it's still on a reasonably junky level, because, for example, as you can see here, let's just say we added an easy thing to check, like the feathers, right? Right now, the defaults don't really work. They do work for the cooldown abilities, like, for example, all of these, they can still be defaulted. So if you were to add a new cooldown, it would automatically follow these styles, because it comes from the defaults, but not for the auras. If we do the same thing to the auras, for example, and we get opacity 0, this is still here. Doesn't actually change. Or maybe because it's a cooldown, you don't want to see the swipe, the dark swipe on a buff. So you go to cooldown swipe and you say, I want the color to be light. It's already set on light and it doesn't really work. You can only get rid of the swipe. So now all of the buffs you add are going to follow not having a swipe, without having to manually edit them every time you add a new aura, right? Imagine you decide you want to add something like fade to the auras. Now that I added fade, it's going to follow the default of the aura, which is to not have a swipe. So if I fade, no swipe. That can be followed through the defaults without you having to every time manually edit all of these, because these can edit everything, but only everything that's visible. So only everything that you have already put in here. If you, for some reason, decide to add something else, then it won't count amongst these anymore. If you add Shackle Undead, right? This wouldn't be included until you check them again and edit this again. Now, on a side note, don't get baited by the fact that these groups are named by default, like buffs go here, right? Nothing stops you from putting a buff here and a buff here, even if the default profile buffs is called buffs in here. Just like the Blizzard default buffs are gonna show up in a single group, in here you can just move them around. If you want to use a buff in here and a buff in here, you can. So if you, for example, care about dividing defensive buffs or mobility buffs away from, important spec related procs, like for example the instacast Mind Blast is much more important than your Angelic Feather duration, so you want this one to be more important, more visible than these two. If you want them, you can just move them away as defensive buffs, for example. You can do the same with many others, like your Protective Light damage reduction or your Desperate Prayer. All of these can just be thrown elsewhere, even if they are buffs. They don't have to necessarily go into the default buff bucket. You can just move them away by yourself whenever you want to, wherever you want to have them, and they're gonna work just fine, right? So That's the thing for icons for you to style. Now, worth mentioning, not that this is ArcUI related, but it is tangentially related to the fact that mask right now does work with ArcUI. So if you want to have this, you can have it on everything. You can have it on whatever style of icons you want to have. You're going to style them directly through mask rather than through the add-on itself, right? You can use mask for this. The last part of this styling comes from your bars. These are different ones that require a bit more tedious managing, because these are given to you. They are literally in the cooldown manager. All you do is just pop them in and they will show up. Pop them out, they go away. Pop them in, they show up. These do not. If you want bars, you have to edit them yourself. So imagine you want the duration of your fade, for example, in the bar. Then you have to create the bar. So first, most of the time you will create a buff for fade. You can hide the Blizzard original, and then you can choose if you want for all the specs. Obviously, you know, presumably, that fade is available for all these three, so it can show up in all three. Same reasoning as why you can't have different icons in different positions. If you respec, these will stay for all three different specs, but also will stay in the same styling and the same positioning. So again, if you considered a certain buff not nearly as important for a different spec, it's better for you to just use a single one for each, which means more managing, more editing by yourself, but you can then move it around depending on the spec. You cannot automatically make it switch position based on your spec. So if you choose this one being in a certain position, it will stay in that position as you respec. So usually the most logical ones are to hide when inactive. Choose whichever position you want. If you want it right on top of you, right, or if you want it somewhere else, you can choose a bunch of different things in here. The names, the size, you can choose if you want to have the duration text, and then obviously you have to style the duration text to look the way you want. Stack text, not necessary for buffs that don't have a stack. Obviously, if one of your buffs has a stack, you want to keep the stack text somewhere in here to show it up. Some of the cool things you can have with this, just as an extra, is to have a styled color. Because one thing is to say, oh, I'm gonna be themed. If fade is this color, let's just make the bar like this, so it's just like fade, right? Or you can have thresholds. You can choose to have the bar recolor even the color you want. Recolor based on the duration. So the shorter it gets, the redder it gets, basically. As well as the textures, whichever texture you like the most for fade. So then when you're done, it's gonna look like this, right? And then it starts changing color the closer it gets to expiring. That's ultimately what could be the most tedious thing, because unfortunately, at least for now, there is no way to edit any of this in bulk, copy paste, right? For example, okay, I've just done fade. Let me just, make another defensive if I want to put all my defensives here, right? Add my Desperate Prayer bar. Once you have made this, there is no way to just copy, Control C, Control V, right click, copy. There's no way. You have to manually go back here and manually do it all again for every single bar you want. Nothing stops you from being a bit more, inventive with your bars. You can change the width and the height of the different bars if you want to create different things, if you want to, change the orientation to be vertical instead, or drain versus fill, or very simply the reverse, upside down, with the different textures if you want, and just move them around. You can always do that. However, as mentioned, once you have done this, once this is done and saved and whatever, it will have to be remade again. You won't be able to just copy paste this to any other ability. It's just going to be for Desperate Prayer, and that's it. There's not going to be anything else that you can, for now at least, there's nothing that you can do to copy paste and in bulk copy all of these things. The extra in here, there are a few extra things for this ArcUI that you can still go for. One is not quite ready yet, but don't forget, we almost have 2 months before the release of the expansion. This will be done by then. Is the secondary resources, or just any extra resource besides the default one, which is why this thing right here is not coming from ArcUI, is coming from a different add-on for you to edit these things to show up. And the other one for ArcUI at the moment is going to be your Weakauras. What I have put here in items, what is here in items, is coming for Weakauras. So very simply, you just open your bags and do this, and then this. So you have your potions. I have already created and not used right now, obviously, all of the midnight potions that you might want to use, from the health potion to the DPS potions to the mana potions, and then healthstones. So obviously, if you enable this, you have to go and manually, you know, disable, I guess almost permanently, if you never plan on using them, disable the ones you don't care about. So for now, it's basically all of the new expansion ones, and then just put in the ones you care about. So your health potion, your healthstone, the ID, as you can see there, item ID is 5512. So when you see here, if you're like, but I'm a rogue, I don't have a healthstone yet, just do this, and you will get your healthstone. And then you have your mana potion if you're a healer, for example, and then you have them here next to your buffs or wherever you want to put them. This is just my profile. If you want to use your items elsewhere, just put them elsewhere. So to finish, as a reminder, the most important thing you do once you want to style your ArcUI is to start with groups. Start having a set default of groups you always know is gonna come up like this, or start creating more, especially when this is fully fleshed again, since it has been dragged back for like a day because of the update, to create one, for example, for the raid, one for Mythic Plus, one for healers, one for tanks. Once you have the groups ready, they will always load. So you load your new Blood Decay and you just load the tank profile and it will show up wherever you want. And then you can start putting in the icons, the abilities, the defensives and whatever you want, and then save the profile. And then if it just so happens that switching between hero talents, for example, or switching between Mythic Plus and the raid, and you change a bunch of different buttons here and there, you can just save the entire thing to a different profile and a different spec, and then load it based on the spec or based on the profile. Since, as we mentioned, swapping icons, especially if they are not part of a replacement as simple as this one, for example, one or the other, but you change more things, they wouldn't be able to be naturally repositioned in the cooldown manager by themselves. So if you just save them on a profile, it will be easier. So that's it for now for the setting up of your ArcUI, both from a group perspective, the icons perspective, as well as the bars perspective, finishing with some of the features that are yet to be fully fleshed out, like the resources, not quite there yet. So this is everything related to styling ArcUI for now. Obviously there will be updates soon to come, no doubt, since many of the add-ons nowadays are being updated very, very quickly because of the many fixing and polishing that these add-ons are getting as this prepatch has launched. But for today though, on this Wednesday, this is what we had to go over. I'm going to leave you to the rest of presumably UI styling you were doing, so that we can say our goodbyes for now. We're starting by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, once again, we have been quite verbose with this video. We could have gotten it quite shorter. God damn it.